Guess I'll get started.
We're good.
Good evening. On behalf of the Adult Education Committee of Temple Gates of Prayer, I want to welcome everybody here tonight from a large number of different places to our celebration of Yom Ha'Atzmaut on this, the 73rd anniversary of the declaration of the State of Israel back in 1948, an event that was dreamed about and hoped for and prayed for over 18 centuries. We've all heard the stories of the early pioneers, the leaders, the war heroes, the diplomats who have helped and maintained the nation. But like any nation, Israel has countless people who are publicly unknown, but extraordinary in different ways. We will learn about some of these people tonight from our guest speaker, author Rhonda Robinson. And now I would like to turn it over to Rabbi Biller.
Good evening, everybody. We're all looking forward to hearing from Rhonda. So for anybody who's any part of a synagogue life, what we are celebrating tonight is part of our in and out day-to-day. Every day we say, Hashivenu Avinu, return us, our Father. And while it has a connotation of return our soul, there's also a sense of returning to our home. In the Amida every day, at Tzemach David, Avdecha Meher L'Artzecha, Tasim, your children, the children of David, your progeny, may they increase, and hurriedly, God, take them to a messianic era, again, meaning a return to Zion. Every time we say Birkat HaMazon, when we bench after eating bread, when we're referring to Israel, we use the phrase Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu, the very beginning, the budding of our redemption. And then finally, all of us know, every Jew knows how we end a Seder all over the world, the last 2,000 years. The Shana Haba next year in Jerusalem. Well, as Larry mentioned, 18 centuries, and after all of those centuries, we are living in that era. I had a secretary in Rockland County who in 1948 had been a secretary in the United Nations. And she talked about the day that all the nations were in the council chamber, and everybody knew the vote was going to go on for a state of Israel. And all the Jews who worked in the building left their posts. They couldn't contain themselves. And they were literally listening in at the door, at the doors of the chamber, waiting to take on the count, and were just beside themselves. In 1967, at the winning of the Six-Day War, Jews in Russia, Jews who had been forbidden for decades to show up anywhere near a synagogue, congregated impulsively in the tens of thousands around the synagogues, having been forbidden to be there. That connection. Now, sadly, the cost to all of this is lives which are given continually to make other lives, ours, the lives of Israelis, the lives of other Jews everywhere in the world, worthwhile. And so there's this transition day where the lives that are lost are mourned, and it's really the saddest day on the Israeli calendar. And then that day literally morphs. People are in the day of mourning, and as it becomes dark towards the end of the day, it turns into Independence Day, Yom Ha'Atzmaut, which we're celebrating tonight. And there are the explosions of fireworks and parades. And that's why we sing, Od Lo Avdat Tikvatenu. Our hope never gets lost. You can crush us, you can beat us, you can fight us, but we exult over and over as Jews in being here. We're going to turn it over to Chazon Bear, who will lead us in Hatikva and the famous words, Od Lo Avdat Tikvatenu, our hope never dies.
If you can, stand, please. Amod Dom. Kol od balevav penima nefesh Yehudi homia ulfate mizrach kadima עין לציון צופיה. עוד לא אבדה תקוותנו, התקווה בת שנות 2000, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון וירושלים.
Thank you, Cousin Bear.
Now I will introduce the spotlight.
Just talk.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to introduce our distinguished speaker, Rhonda Robinson. Rhonda Robinson lives in Atlanta, where she works as a writer for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. She also freelances for Jewish publications such as Hadassah, The Forward, the Atlanta Jewish Times, and Aish.com. Rhonda is a member of the Authors Guild and a lifetime member of Hadassah. She looks forward to sharing stories with us from her book, Beyond Politics, Inspirational People of Israel, in honor of Yom Ha'Atzmaut.
Who's on top of the zip page?
Good evening. Thank you, Ann and Larry, Rabbi, and Hazan. Good evening, Temple Gates of Prayer family and friends from all over. It's great to be back at Temple Gates of Prayer. I was part of the family here almost 30 years ago when I was married to Hazan Bear. I'm so honored you invited me to share my book and my deep passion for Israel on Yom Ha'Atzmaut, Israel Independence Day. If you're like me, you terribly miss being able to travel freely to Israel, but because of COVID, it's going to take some time and a lot more patience until that's possible. We're going to journey there together tonight on my magic carpet. Settle in and prepare to tour Israel as I present stories of inspirational people all over the country from my book, Beyond Politics, Inspirational People of Israel. First, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and what drove me to spend years of my life on this labor of love. I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. Yes, there are Jews in Tennessee. There are about 2,000 in Knoxville, along with a conservative synagogue, Reformed Temple, Chabad, and its amazing Jewish day school. My family belonged to the conservative synagogue, and as a kid, I went to Sunday school where we learned about the history of Israel. It seemed really dry, pardon the pun. Israel did not capture my imagination back then, and it would take years before that happened. The seeds for this book were planted on my first trip to Israel in 1994, although I didn't know it then. It was love at first sight. My Jewish soul felt so at home. I met up with a tour group of 6 people from all over the US, touring around Israel in a minivan with our guide, Ruvain. We did the basic introduction to Israel around the Sea of Galilee, Jerusalem, Masada, the Dead Sea, Haifa. It was a real intimate tour with only 6 of us. I remember being amazed that things I'd read about in the Torah, the Bible, took place on these sites. They weren't just stories. I had the fever all right, and I knew I had to come back. 2 years later, in 1996, I attended Hebrew University in Jerusalem to learn basic Hebrew. That summer was one of the best times of my life. I felt so free just being a student again, with no worries, no faxes, no phones, barely any access to email at that time. I felt like I could reach out and touch God from my dormitory balcony. That summer, I also broke in as a freelancer for the Jerusalem Post, an English language daily newspaper. My first article was about the Chicken Lady of Jerusalem, Clara Hammer, a woman in her 80s who had started a charity fund to provide chicken for poor families on Shabbat, the Sabbath. I heard a rabbi mention her during his Rosh Hashanah sermon and tracked her down. She was lovely. Back home in Tennessee the following year, I first had the vision of creating a coffee table book featuring stories about inspiring Israelis who make a difference, like the Chicken Lady. I had wanted to write the book for Israel's 50th anniversary in 1998, but did not realize 1 year wasn't enough time to make that happen. Then in 1999, I made Aliyah, moved to Israel with my 2 dogs, and became a citizen. I was meeting unbelievable people every day, people you don't see here on the 6 o'clock news. I wanted other people to know about this side of Israel, Israel behind the stereotypical, political, controversial headlines. Part of Israel's magic is the rich mosaic of people living there. I wanted to show a wide range of Jewish Israelis, Ashkenazic, Sephardic, religious, secular, young, old, male and female from all over the country, the globe. A few years later, I was back in the United States in graduate school, and my dream took shape as I traveled to Israel to research, then write a few first chapters for my book. They included a pediatric heart surgeon for Save a Child's Heart, a Holocaust survivor, one of the first Ethiopian Knesset members, and of course, the Chicken Lady of Jerusalem. I hope to spread the word through these stories about the many caring Israelis who are making a great difference in the lives of others. My book was a 15-year labor of love, from vision in 1997 to publication in 2011. I made at least 6 trips to interview and photograph subjects all over the country. Rereading my book to prepare for this talk, I fell in love with them all over again. Knew this would happen. When I talk about my subjects, I tend to get emotional because of my fondness for them. Most of them I didn't know before I did the book. I've got my tissues with me. Sometimes my passion for this beautiful side of Israel brings me to tears. I want everyone to know about this side rather than forming judgments about Israel from the often controversial political headlines. Now I want to share some stories more deeply with you. I'm going to read a few of my favorites and then take questions at the end. First, there's my muse, Clara Hammer.
Oh, she's not coming up. That's not good.
We'll pause for the photo to appear.
If it'll come up, sure. Sorry. I can. There she is.
All right. Hello, Clara. I hadn't seen the Chicken Lady in 8 years. We first met after the summer I spent at Ulpan, an intensive Hebrew language program at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. I was looking for story ideas to pitch to Sam Orbaum, who was then the features editor at the Jerusalem Post, where I wanted to break in as a freelancer. During high holiday services, the rabbi of a synagogue on a grown street mentioned the Chicken Lady in his sermon about people doing good deeds. Later, I tracked down spunky Chaya Clara Hammer, who became my first story for the Post. Now it was winter in Jerusalem and Clara had a bad cold, but she insisted on the telephone, "I'll put on my makeup and my smile and I'll be fine. Come on over." The next day at her dining room table, the nerve center of her tzedakah, or charity operation, the bubbly chicken lady of Jerusalem offered orange juice, sweets, and her usual good cheer. It all started in 1980 as she stood in line at Alti Hacker's butcher shop in Jerusalem to buy her Shabbat order. Clara delights in reliving the scene. There were 2 women ahead of me and 2 women in back of me, and in front was a young girl. I judged her to be about 13. And he handed her this huge bag of plastic that you put on the counter. I could see that all that was in there was fat, skins, and some bones. And she said, "Toda, thank you," and walked out. I was curious to know what she does with that junk, I would call it, because when I buy a chicken, I tell him to please take off the whole skin because it has cholesterol, and so do other people. When it was her turn, Clara asked the butcher, "No, so how many cats or dogs does that family have?" He explained the family had many children and the father was on dialysis. Because of their financial difficulties, they had run up a tremendous bill. So the butcher now just gave them fat and skin for a soup for Friday and a cholet or stew for Saturday. Meanwhile, the women behind her were getting restless. Gewehret, lady, let's go." Clara said, "Rega, wait." I felt that I had something of great importance to accomplish, she recalls in English. I said to Mr. Hacker, "From today on, throw that stuff in the garbage and give the family 2 chickens, a kilo of meat, chopped or regular, and some very, very good turkey bones, because I also use them in cholet or stew, and I will pay you." And the Clara Hammer Chicken Fund took wing. Soon the butcher began telling her about other families who needed help. Rabbis, social workers, and friends sent her referrals. Sometimes Clara initiated her own searches. For instance, when she heard about a family whose mother had committed suicide, she dispatched a granddaughter to that neighborhood. The granddaughter found a neighbor to serve as a liaison with the family. The neighbor would take the family chicken for Shabbat for the Sabbath until the man felt strong enough again to remarry. Clara always has tried to follow the medieval Jewish philosopher Maimonides' principles of charity, the highest form of which is to help somebody get back on his feet so that he no longer needs to depend on others. On a limited budget herself, the pensioner receives Social Security income from her 40-year career as a Hebrew teacher in the United States. She couldn't keep providing chickens out of her own pocket, so she spread word to her 3 children and 10 grandchildren, and little by little, the fund grew. How many donors? Who can count? Hundreds for sure, most of them from America. And in America, it's mostly Florida. She gestures toward her old-fashioned filing system, a stack of boxes that look like recipe containers. They hold index cards with names and addresses of donors across the globe. The chicken lady treasures poems and letters from her public. A newly engaged couple once sent $200 with a note asking her to share their joy with those less fortunate. Clara obliged by taking a group of Russians out to a restaurant and topping off the meal with vodka. She easily empathizes with people who are hungry, sick, or needy. So when I hear of close to 1 million hungry families, you hear it, you read it in the papers, and I can help some of the children, I remember being chased out of Russia at the age of 10, getting to the borderline of Russia and Romania, a river. Clara and her family survived 3 pogroms in the Ukraine before running away. They could cross into Romania only when the river was frozen. So she, her father, mother, sister, and brother waited. Finally, in a blanket of deep snow, the water froze and they crossed. My mother was short of breath and she fell in the snow. They wouldn't let my father go pick her up, and they arrested us and put us into prison in Romania. 5 months we were in prison. Just imagine not knowing where my mother is. And my mother, this poor woman, not knowing where her husband and her 3 children are. Jews in Romania heard about the family and paid a lot of money to redeem them. The family told the Romanian Jews the story, and they put out a search and found Clara's mother in a hospital. The reunited family came to Palestine and lived in a tent for 3 years. But because the mother had contracted tuberculosis, they were advised to live in America for better hospital care. Clara's empathy extends from the hungry to orphans. I remember being handed food when we were hungry in Romania, and I know what it means to be motherless at the age of 15. In her 94th year, Clara and her chicken fund were nurturing 252 families, many of whom went directly to the butcher to receive chicken, meat, or liver, or a substitute if they happen to be vegetarian. The chicken lady also was sending money to more than 100 needy families every month. I send out every Erev Rosh Chodesh, beginning of the new month, a check wrapped in a piece of paper that says Chodesh Tov, have a good month. So how can you wish a Chodesh Tov with an empty envelope? So you put in a check according to the size of the family or the needs of the family. If it's a family with 11 children or a family whose father was on a bus and killed by a suicide bomber, it can be from 250 shekels every single month up to 600. That translated to about $60 to $150 in American dollars. An observant Jew who covers her hair with a wig and dresses modestly, Clara frequently cites Torah to make a point. Torah says to help one who puts out a hand for help. Any family that turns to me for help, capital H-E-L-P, I trust them and I help them. The need is tremendous. You read in newspapers, you hear on radio, you see on television, but some people just give an oi, and they shut off the radio, shut off the television, put away the newspaper. Again, she quotes Torah. It says that a good name is better than good oil. And Baruch Hashem, praise God, I have a good name. They know that every shekel I get goes to the charity fund. Thank you, Clara Hammer. And now we will move to Tel Aviv to meet Lior Sasson, Saving a Child's Heart.
Oh, got to get rid of her. Sorry. Sorry.
That's okay. Take your time.
Try again. Oh, Clara's got to go. Sorry.
Clara's having a good time. She wants to hang around.
Now it'll be easier. Here's Lior.
All right. Thank you. It's 6 a.m. the first Monday in November, and my favorite taxi driver is whisked me to the Edith Wolfson Medical Center in Cologne to witness open heart surgery on a little girl from Angola. I'm scheduled to meet Dr. Lior Sasson, director of the cardiothoracic department and head of the pediatric cardiac surgery unit at 7 a.m. as he prepares for the operation. My taxi pulls up to the pediatric emergency room just as the heaven opens and rain begins drenching the parched land. Lior is waiting at the entrance and politely ushers me in to the windowless bowels of the hospital, where we will remain all morning oblivious to the weather. He's the lead surgeon for Save a Child's Heart, an Israeli-based international humanitarian program offering top-rate cardiac care for children from developing countries. Lior and his team believe every child, regardless of nationality, religion, sex, or family financial situation, deserves the best treatment possible. This is one of the many good stories about Israel that garner too little attention. I literally will be looking over his shoulder during the entire operation as he and a colleague open Rosalinda's sternum and repair the holes in her heart. I owe this privilege to my colleague, David Silverman, an Israeli photojournalist. He had an established relationship with Save a Child's Heart, enabling me to easily meet Lior, put on scrubs, and observe the procedure being performed on tiny Rosalinda. Dr. Lior Sasson exudes calm even when holding a life in his hands. The Israeli doctor painstakingly makes minute incisions and stitches in a child's heart, while describing the steps in English for an observer and directing his medical team. I'm never calm, he admits, hours after the open heart surgery. Maybe it looks like this, but every operation has its own stress, its own tension. I think it's healthy stress because it keeps you sharp. There are so many unknown variables in surgery, so I'm always worried about something. The thing is to trust yourself and your team and to make cardiac surgery routine, make it boring, so everyone knows what the next step is in the sequence of events. Just after 8 a.m., an anesthesiologist puts 4-year-old Rosalinda to sleep, so she will feel nothing and have no memory of the operation. Her figure limp on the operating table, she's hooked up to a cardiopulmonary bypass machine, which will take over the function of the heart and lungs during surgery. Then Lior and another heart surgeon open Rosalinda's chest, splitting the sternum in half with an oscillating saw. We can see her heart beating through a hole in her brown skin. The doctors use solution to arrest her heart or flatline it, so it will not beat while they're working inside of it. Quietly, methodically, the doctors use scissors to open her heart and are surprised to find more holes than they expected. They patch and seal each one with a surgical cloth called a Gore-Tex graft. It's just after 10:30 a.m. and appropriately somewhere in the room, Louis Armstrong is belting out "What a Wonderful World" over the music system. It's a dark morning. Outside, sheets of rain pound the Tel Aviv area, but inside, the pediatric operating room remains a calm sea of green. Little Rosalinda lies still on sterile green sheets as the doctors and assistants tie off her stitches. They wean her from the cardiopulmonary bypass machine, allowing her heart to circulate blood and her lungs to breathe again. After making sure her organs function properly, they close her chest. Lior leaves the operating room at 11:46 a.m., keeping on his glasses, but removing the loops over them that magnify everything fourfold when he's performing surgery. He heads down the hall for a quick lunch of hummus and pita. We talk in the staff lounge about Rosalinda's prognosis. Now she will be like any other kid. She will have a normal life expectancy, he says. This is a real life-saving operation. Otherwise, she would die at age 20. He humbly credits his team for helping to make such a difference in a child's life possible. Poor children like Rosalinda, who were born with congenital heart defects, come to Israel from all over the world to receive medical care not available to them otherwise. Donors to Save a Child's Heart cover all the expenses. Thank you, Dr. Sasson.
Hold on.
From rainy Tel Aviv, we're gonna head over to Bat Ayin, which is a village in the scenic Judean hills near Jerusalem, and meet Hannah Bracha Siegelbaum. In Israel, I feel my soul vibrating. and Hannah Bracha is a free spirit who founded a women's seminary for seekers such as herself.
Can you see?
Not yet.
Oh, sorry. Let's try the other one. Oh. Let's try this one. Better? No?
Not yet.
Trying to read.
Sam, right?
That one?
Yay, thank you. Yes. Hello, Hannah Bracha.
Sorry.
My rabbi lives in Bat Ayin, a funky Jewish village in the scenic Judean hills near Jerusalem. We met when he had a pulpit in my hometown of Knoxville, Tennessee, a conservative American city in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. The two places are worlds apart, but Yehoshua Khan connects them for me. He also connected me with Hannah Bracha Siegelbaum, his eclectic next-door neighbor in Bat Ayin. She's a former flower child from Denmark who found her soul, her husband, and her calling in Israel. Now a Rebbitzin, or rabbi's wife, Hannah Bracha started a Jewish studies program for women that integrates the Jewish Bible and spirituality with creativity and environmental awareness. The Khans and the Siegelbaums are among 130 families, rabbis and Torah scholars, artists, musicians, nutritionists and holistic healers, meditation teachers and movement therapists who populate Bat Ayin, Hebrew for daughter of the eye. They overlook sweeping vistas of Israel. They also tend to see the world a little differently from the mainstream. When I meet Hannah Bracha one November morning, she wants to keep gardening while we talk so as not to waste precious time. Flies buzz around her as she digs her hands deep into the soil, planting artichokes and picking radishes and weeds called malva. The unconventional interview setting reflects her colorful spirit. How Hannah Bracha Siegelbaum made her way from Copenhagen, home of the Little Mermaid statue, and Tivoli Gardens fairy tale amusement park, to Bat Ayin, a village of rugged homes and dusty, boulder-strewn roads, is a story straight out of the 1960s. It concerns hippie culture, rebellion against Western values, and spiritual seeking. For Hannah Bracha, a spiritual healer and founder of a women's seminary, it was a journey to explore the unknown world of her Jewish heritage. As she says, the truth is that although I grew up in an assimilated secular home, I seem to have been born religious. My religiosity was not expressed through any conscious observance of Jewish laws, yet as far back as I can recall, I remember praying to God every night. It felt quite natural to address him every night, my own secret comforter who was always there for me. Hannah Bracha was born in Denmark in 1960, the granddaughter of a Hasidic yeshiva student captivated by the secular Enlightenment. Ironically, she returned to the place he had left behind. As I entered 7th grade, I began to question all the values of the society in which I'd been raised. The Judaism to which I'd been exposed seemed like an empty, hypocritical religion. In high school, Hannah Bracha found expression as a hippie, wearing flowy Indian tunics and flowers in her hair. In the classroom, she insisted on sitting on a little rug on the floor. Following a fashion of the era, she and her friends sought to expand their consciousness and enter a brave new world, practicing yoga and meditation and reading the likes of Aldous Huxley, Carlos Castaneda, and Hermann Hesse. After graduation, she set out to explore the world beyond Denmark, traveling lightly with a backpack and outstretched thumb. The idealistic young woman with clear blue eyes hitchhiked through Europe, but soon ran out of money and courage. She phoned home from Paris and let her parents wire her a ticket to Israel, where relatives lived. She had found solace when visiting family in the Promised Land before. In Israel, I feel my soul vibrating. Any other place in the world, I never felt alive. I felt some part of my life was being activated. The energy and sanctity of the Western Wall pierced her soul. A stranger named Chava invited her for tea in the old city of Jerusalem. When Chava shared spiritual insight she had learned in the women's division of Diaspora Yeshiva, where she studied Judaism, Hannah Bracha found herself deeply moved. She had a sense that here was a friend who could share her quest for the truth. The very next day, during the summer of 1979, she enrolled in the yeshiva and began to open her heart to the religion of her ancestors. At the yeshiva, she uncovered the vibrancy of Judaism through singing, dancing, prayer, and community. Now, as Rebbetzin Hannah Bracha, she's able to pass on the fruits of her own search to a new generation of young women on their own spiritual quest. They often pause at a crossroads in their lives and come to Bat Ayin searching for answers. Thank you, Hannah Bracha. Next, we'll meet Phaedra Shapiro in the Galilee, connecting Christians with the people of Israel.
Sorry. It's coming up.
I'll just mention while you're looking for the picture, my intent was to focus the book for an audience not only of Jews who love Israel, but also Christians who are passionate about Israel. So Phaedra is lovely, and there she is. I'm sitting at a picnic table on a windswept hill in the Galilee this Friday morning, animatedly chatting with a 39-year-old Orthodox woman who feels like a kindred spirit. Dr. Phaedra Shapiro grew up in an assimilated Jewish family in Canada. I grew up in an assimilated Jewish family in the South of the United States. She had become interested in evangelical Christians as a university professor. My life had intersected with them ever since childhood in Tennessee. I took the 6:45 a.m. bus for a 2-hour ride from Jerusalem to the Golani Junction, a major crossroads in the Galilee, to meet her, and was not disappointed. Phaedra blends zeal for her dream of teaching Christian visitors about Israel with a solid academic background and personal warmth. She not only had met me at the bus stop 5 minutes from her house, but also had given a lift to 2 young women who needed transportation to her idyllic community of Mitzveh Netofa. Phaedra's Israeli-born husband extended hospitality as well, bringing us apples and hot tea as we schmoozed on an overlook by a synagogue near their house. It was the perfect setting for talking about Phaedra's journey from city life in Toronto to Caravilla in the Galilee. Phaedra Shapiro first visited Israel for her bat mitzvah. The trip planted a seed that kept growing. She graduated high school in Toronto in 1988, then studied in Livnot Ulahibanot, a program in Sfat, also known as Safed, geared towards young Jews with little or no background in Judaism. The name is Hebrew for to build and be built, referring to the contribution the participants make to the land of Israel and to their own knowledge base. Livnot became a foundation for Phaedra's life. She went back to Israel as often as possible, returning as a staff member and to do graduate research that became her first book, Building Jewish Roots, The Israel Experience. In it, Phaedra explores how Israel Experience programs like Livnot help mostly unaffiliated participants in their 20s create rich and varied Jewish identities. The seeds bore fruit for her. Many visits later, Phaedra came back with her Israeli-born husband and their 5 young children, whose ages cover a span of 7 years. She became a citizen of Israel in August 2008. Once upon a time, I had a normal life, jokes Phaedra, clad in a bright orange long sleeve shirt, blue jean skirt, and black tichel, a headscarf worn by married Jewish women who are religious. I had a house and a career, and it was going swimmingly. I had a tenured position at a Canadian university. I had this book, and I had a book award. I had a research grant, and I'm at the height of my career. And all of a sudden, there's this new focus, this new vision. Her husband had always wanted to return to Israel. They had met as students at McMaster University when Phaedra was nearing the end of her doctoral work in religious studies, and he was a new student in the program. By the time they married in 1999, Phaedra already had started teaching in the Department of Religion and Culture at Wilfrid Laurier. She earned her doctorate degree in 2000, had her first child in 2001, received tenure from the university in 2005, then published Building Jewish Roots, and won a National Jewish Book Award in 2006. The family took a sabbatical year in Jerusalem from 2006 to 2007 so that she could work on her next research project, in which she examined Christian Zionism. As Phaedra explains, I was hearing about Christians who love Jews in Israel. I started meeting with people and reading and finding out a little bit more. It was so out of the ordinary for me. I found they were interested in Judaism, they were positive and encouraging, and they were extremely knowledgeable about Israel. Didn't fit my stereotypes about who evangelicals were. So I proposed that for my research project. Phaedra's plan to take a year off in Israel and then return to normal life in Canada got derailed. What happened was I started chasing these Christians around with my tape recorder and kind of got inspired along the way. I was hearing from them about the beauty of Jews living in Israel and about Jews and Christians reading the Bible and taking it seriously. Something happened. It's like a switch flipped. By the middle of that year, it was very clear to us that this was where we needed to be. I watched my children blossom. It was good for me. It was good for my husband. We went back to Canada and prepared for Aliyah, moving to Israel. Nestled amid olive trees, forests, and farms, Phaedra's new home is conveniently located for her Selah workshops to teach Christian tourists about the land, people, and culture of Israel. In terms of Christian sites, this is the heart of it, says Phaedra, whose name comes from Greek mythology. We're 20 minutes from Nazareth and an hour from Capernaum. Selah brings Israel to life beyond the traditional holy sites. It emphasizes genuine connection with Israelis. Phaedra realized the question of what to offer repeat Christian tourists was not being answered. So she put together nature hikes in the Golan and Galilee, classes on topics like the Hebrew Bible and Jewish family values, Sabbath meals with Israeli families, and volunteer opportunities such as visiting the elderly and serving children with special needs. Her groups can see the land of milk and honey in action by picking dates or making their own olive oil. People still should be taking the standard travel agent tour of Israel, Phaedra suggests. We're seeking to add to it. Many Christian visitors come to Israel a lot. How do we keep that vitally important group of people engaged with Israel? We have to be rooted in the country. They have to know people. What does it mean to be an 18-year-old soldier, a new immigrant, or a farmer? In her experience, evangelical Christians want to engage in the modern day miracle of Israel, that for them is evidence God is faithful to his word. Thank you, Phaedra. And our last.
I don't know if I can get him back up. I'm going to try.
Okay. If not, I'll hold up his picture.
Is he there? Yes.
Not yet.
Uh, Okay, let's see what I can do. I
Our
don't know if I
last
can.
story is Shlomo Mola walking out of Ethiopia. Let's see, I can hold up his picture if need.
Thank you. Please.
Okay, let's see. Shlomo Mola is where my finger is. An Ethiopian man with the Jewish or the flag of Israel behind him. It's a blustery, rainy day in Tel Aviv. Schools are closed in Jerusalem because of snow. Shlomo Mola, bundled in a white sweater, is reminiscing about his arrival in Israel in February 1984. Many aspects of life in the Jewish homeland caught him by surprise. It was very cold, like today. In Ethiopia, it's very sunny. The second thing was all the people around me were white people. I didn't understand that. Coming from Gondar province of Ethiopia, where his father Zemene grew crops and tended cows and sheep, Shlomo felt overwhelmed by the buildings and technology. He was confused seeing Jews in Israel using cars on the Holy Sabbath instead of walking. In his small tropical Ethiopian village, the 300 Jewish families practiced their religion without the influences of modernity. They observed customs as Jews had in the First Temple period, 1006 to 586 BCE. Isolated without any connection to Jews around the world, the villagers learned their traditions from rabbis. Everyone 10 and older studied Judaism 3 hours a day until they were married. However, they could not learn Hebrew or practice Judaism in public after the communist regime took over in 1973. Jews were second-class citizens. Ethiopia's constitution prohibited them from owning land. As Shlomo observes, it's very difficult to survive if you don't own your own land. My father, a farmer, was bringing home 1/3 of his product. The rest went to the government. Villagers didn't mix with residents of other Ethiopian villages. We lived a typical African village life. He and my mother didn't know how to read and write. It was an agricultural life. We had no electricity, no clinic, no bank, no public school in every village, no transportation. Shlomo says, sitting in an office of the Jewish agency or Sochnut, where he works. It's hard not to notice the cell phone and laptop with wireless mouse next to him. In Ethiopia, he walked 9 miles to and from his Jewish high school. Shlomo's mother has no formal education, but he speaks with pride and respect for her wisdom. It's a knowledge born of life experience. She had her first son at age 14. It's not unusual for Ethiopian girls to marry at age 12 and boys at 15 or 16. Here in Israel or in Western countries, there's a boyfriend or girlfriend, muses Shlomo, whose name means king in his native country, Neguse. In Ethiopia, they're not going to be lawyers or doctors, but are going to build an agricultural life. Instead of marrying at age 16, Shlomo was trekking 485 miles across Ethiopia and Sudan with 15 friends from his native Gondar province. He had grown up with a Zionist ideology and was trying to reach Israel. We believed Israel was the promised land, a homeland for all the Jews in the diaspora. All the Jews have to come home to build Israel. Shlomo grabbed his chance. Word had it that Israeli intelligence operatives from the Mossad were working in Sudan to rescue Ethiopians. We grew up with the story of Exodus, how Moshe got others to walk to Israel. It's a mitzvah. We weren't naive. We'd be crossing the jungle and the desert, but we decided to take a chance. The dangerous terrain was only one of many hurdles. Shlomo faced a difficult choice about whether or not to separate from his family. In the end, he left behind his parents, 2 sisters, and 9 brothers. He was familiar with Genesis, which says, Lech lecha, go out of thy land and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto the land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee. So Shlomo went out of his land, from his family and his father's house. Ethiopian Jews had dreamed of going to Israel since the modern nation's birth in 1948. They heralded Israel as their true homeland. His band of boys hired a Christian guide to lead the way out. In the jungle, they encountered lions and tigers. But Shlomo and his friends took that part of the adventure in stride. As Africans, it wasn't a big deal, he declares. We knew how to protect ourselves. But then robbers captured the lot, taking the boys' food, clothing, and money. As prey to wild men, the young Jews felt themselves to be in great danger. But the boys did not have guns, and that worked to their advantage. Unarmed, they just said they were refugees, and the robbers let them go. Life in the desert was brutal. Shlomo and his friends had no water, food, or shade. After 1 week, they were captured by Sudanese police who killed one of the boys. The police jailed the rest of them for 91 days, torturing and beating the Ethiopian youths who didn't have any documents on them. Then surprisingly, the officers gave the boys their freedom, driving them by truck to a refugee camp. Shlomo had never ridden in a vehicle before. In the camp, for only the second time in his life, he met white people. One of them, dressed in Arab garb, said mysteriously, I know where you're coming from. What village? He met the boys later and ordered them to follow him. Apprehensively, they did so and saw groups of people climbing into trucks. They drove through the Sudan desert in the middle of the night to a military airport. We thought they would deport us to a neighboring country. We didn't know who they were, says Shlomo. The secretive Arab man gave a sign, and suddenly parachutes rained from the sky. An airplane landed noiselessly. Baruchim habayim, welcome. We're Israelis, said the white man. The 420 Ethiopian Jews started crying, clapping, and singing Shalom Aleichem. Under a shroud of secrecy, they were airlifted to Israel. After a 4-hour flight that capped many years of waiting, they had come to the promised land in Operation Moses. And I just want to mention that after our interview, Shlomo was named to the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, and realized the opportunity he'd begun to create as a youth with his journey across the desert. And that concludes our stories. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
What a sight. Yeah, we're unmuted.
Thank you, Rhonda, for an excellent presentation, a fascinating profile of 5 quite amazing people, and of course, all of the others that we read about in your book. We will have a linkage for those who'd like to buy the book. I will be in touch with Dina in the office tomorrow morning, and we will send you the link if you are interested in purchasing the book, Beyond Politics. Beyond Politics, Inspirational People of Israel by Rhonda Robinson. Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. And now
I'm going to ask the first question. You covered a wide range of Jews in the book from different backgrounds, as well as countries like Iraq and India, Australia, and Algeria. How did you find subjects for the book?
Thank you very much, Anne. That's a great question. It was mainly by networking and word of mouth and my intuition. I didn't use social media. It was not really so common back then. I put the word out to friends and colleagues that I was looking for a mix of Jewish Israelis with these parameters: Holocaust, kibbutz, just all the varieties that I wanted to fill in from different countries. And I also saved articles from Jewish publications about interesting, unusual people. So from the beginning of the book, the first story is Rena Quint. I'll start with her and then talk about Shlomo and maybe one in the middle. My photographer, David Silverman, was a very well-known photographer in Israel. He lived there. He had a lot of contacts. He put me in touch with the PR person for Yad Vashem, the Holocaust institution in Israel. And she put me in touch with Rena Quint, who is just an amazing story in her own right. And then Shlomo Mola, I met through political channels that began with my cousin AJ Robinson, who's a mover and shaker here in Atlanta. AJ put me in touch with an Israeli diplomat, Alon Liel, who was the former consul general to the south of the United States from 1990 to 92. And Alon opened up doors for me in Israel. So with just 2 degrees of separation from Alon, I was in touch with Shlomo and interviewing him. And he was quite lovely. I did another interview with him when he was in the Knesset. He was just so accessible. And then kind of a quirky way, I met somebody, Yisrael Avidor, who was a pioneer and helped start one of the kibbutzes in Israel in 1948. I had wanted a kibbutznik. I met somebody on a dating site. It wasn't Yisrael, it was somebody who lived on the kibbutz, who was an actor. And I was telling him, oh, I'm coming to Israel and looking for people to interview for my book. And he put me in touch with Yisrael on his kibbutz, who was just lovely and a wonderful story.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
Larry's going to ask the next question.
Who's the most interesting person who didn't make it into the book?
Oh, that's a good question. Most interesting or the most challenging? There were 2 that I can think of. Maybe the most interesting was a woman I had met when I was interviewing one of these other folks. She worked in the office. She said she had a parrot farm. She was a native Anglo, so that made it easy to speak English with her. She lived on a kibbutz. So the photographer and I trekked out to her kibbutz to interview her, thinking this is a great story. She could barely sit down long enough to be interviewed or photographed. She also had goats and some other various animals on her little property there. So what she was doing during our interview was making cheese out of the goat milk. I didn't realize she lived on a shoestring. She couldn't wait for the interview to be over. I didn't really get enough for a story. So she could hitchhike to Jerusalem to sell her cheese for money to live on. So I thought this story is not going to have longevity long enough to make it through the process of a book. That just didn't feel right to continue. Although the photographer got great photos and was kind of disappointed.
Okay.
And then another one was a woman I had a really good rapport with. She did have legs. Her story had legs. The quirky thing that happened with her, she was from Yugoslavia, which was great, checked off a box of a country, that was kind of interesting. Holocaust survivors for parents, teacher, her very beloved. Anyway, my lawyer had sent me back to Israel 4 months after my previous trip because I had gotten homemade. I thought I was so smart. I had homemade releases for everybody to sign that I'd been asking them to sign along the way. But my lawyer said, no, you need to go back and take a very official story and photo release. So I went back and tried to get in touch with this woman. And she surprised me by saying, no, I'm not going to sign it. I want you to sign a release for me, like that you're going to use the story as we discussed. So I couldn't do that. Couldn't give up control of my book.
Thank you.
I have one more question before we open it up to the audience.
Sure.
What advice would you give people who might want to write a book?
Thank you, Anne. I guess I would say start with your audience and purpose. Like why do you want to write a book? What's motivating you? For me, this book was about my passion for showing people about the other side of Israel that just gets so washed away in all the political news. You don't hear about these good stories too often. And then know your audience. Do you want to write a memoir? Maybe that just is for your family then, and you could go through self-publishing. That would kind of direct how you approach your topic and getting it published. Then also I would suggest having a writing buddy. I happen to have an awesome writing buddy who I met at a writers conference in New York a couple of years ago. And it's just she's an accountability partner. We touch base loosely every week or so. She's doing she's writing a novel, so it's really different from what I do. And we support each other and check in. It's also a good way to have personal accountability for yourself, because my book dragged out quite a while because I just wasn't reporting to anybody. I was kind of taken out by some things that happened, which I can talk about later. And then also, as my graduate advisor at the university said, every little thing moves the project along. Like, don't worry about, oh, I've got to write for an hour, sit down at my writing desk and have perfect concentration. 10 minutes, 15 minutes moves the project along. And one more thing, I would suggest continue to learn. Like the 92nd Street Y has, especially during the Zoom era, online classes about whatever genre you're interested in. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
It's good advice. Now we'd like to open it up to anyone who is listening, who has a question. They can, let's see if we can put it in gallery view.
Maybe this button right
And I have a question.
there.
Okay.
That one.
Let's see,
That one.
unmute your, oh yeah.
She's
you're
unmuted. Okay. Yes,
I'm
Ellen.
unmuted. Okay, so Alan and I are sitting here and we're enjoying all the stories, but we mostly enjoyed the story about the chicken lady. We love that story. So I was wondering if Rhonda keeps up to date on what's happening in everyone's lives. I'm not sure when she wrote about the chicken lady and if she's still alive, but I was then wondering also if other people can still donate, if the chicken lady's donations, if you could still do it, if the I don't know if the project went on and on, if she's not still alive.
I'm sure she's thanking you from heaven for the question. She died in 2010, almost at 100 years old. Her daughter, Hannah, and her great-granddaughter continue the fund. It's called the Clara Hammer Chicken Fund. And they do send out regular mailings and keep the good work going that she started. So thank you for that question.
Excellent. And thank you. Thank you.
I have a question.
That's Mark.
So Rhonda, first of all, amazing stories that I worked at a college for 10 years, and I think college students would really benefit from these stories. And a lot of times Israel is not given good public relations. Are there any efforts to get these stories, this book to college students? And I think that would be a great audience.
Well, that's an awesome question. I'll think about that. I've never thought about it, but I would love to help broaden the audience, and it's particularly to college students who may be a good audience for a different point of view about Israel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Bernie,
Unmute yourself.
unmute.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It was most informative and entertaining. My question has to do with the people you presented, with the possible exception of the physician, were religious Jews. Did you delve into the world of secular Israelis, non-religious, non-observant, and do you have a feel for how prevalent they are in Israeli society, and what kind of influence they have?
I don't know the big picture, but I can talk about my book. I did want to get a mix representing different faces of Israel. So I've got several secular people in my book. They include a chef who in Jerusalem, who has an amazing restaurant across from the city of David. He's from Iraq. My friend's son, Elchanan, who was in the army at that time. Trying to think who else. There were several because I did, a woman from India, actually a Jewish woman who grew up in India. She's Indian. So I just wanted to show this mosaic of Israel. As far as, do I have a vibe on how prevalent they are? I don't really know. It's a good question. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Check page 2.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Hi,
Yes, Michelle.
thank you very much. It was wonderful. Do you have any plans to perhaps write another book with new stories and or follow up on the stories that you've done and tell us all?
Thank you so much. I think I did. I needed a rest after this one. It took a while to pull it all together. Right now, my passion is telling the stories of Holocaust survivors. I write regularly for a Jewish website, and my passion is just to interview as many and publish as many stories as I can while they're still alive. And
That's fantastic. Yes, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, if you know of anybody who's interesting, let me know.
I wish I did. My dad and his family, but they're no longer here. So, but it's great that you're doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel very driven to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say, not for this presentation, but I have an uncle who survived the Holocaust, and his story is one of the most amazing stories imaginable. And I think you'd be more than interested. He passed not that many years ago. He was in his 90s, but his story was so remarkable. It was recorded in German on Austrian radio.
Wow.
And my cousin, who's his daughter, transcribed it in English. I'd be glad to share that with you.
I'd love to see it. Thank you so
I
much.
mean, it's an amazing story.
Very good.
So
Thank you, Bertie. I don't know. I can't soak up enough Holocaust stories. It's so critical right now to capture them while the folks are still alive, or even after. I think it's.
so if you want to contact me, I guess you can speak to Dina at the office, and
We'll figure it out.
she'll have the contact information.
Thank you so much.
Anyone else with a question or a comment?
On page 2. Okay,
Let's take a look.
we're good.
Oh,
Thank you, Rhonda, for a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Rabbi and Chazan, for your introduction and for singing Hatikva. And thank you to this wonderful audience tonight for being here and to helping to observe Yom Ha'Atzmaut, perhaps a little differently than you're used to, just to get a profile of some of the interesting and yet everyday yet extraordinary people of the state of Israel.
we have, go ahead.
Thank you all very much.
We have
Thank you.
someone here on the screen from Israel. We have someone, my brother is on from California. We have people from Georgia. We have people from Tennessee. We have people from all over on this Zoom tonight. So thank everyone. I want to thank everyone who came. And we did have someone on from Texas.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you all. You've been a great audience.
Okay.
And thank you
Thank you.
to Ann and Larry. Ann and
Yeah.
Larry, thank you for putting
Yeah.
this together. You guys are great.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ellen.
Thank
That
you.
was great.
Good job, Larry and
Wonderful.
Ann.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Very
And
Well
nice.
done.
And where would the link be to purchase the book?
We'll be in touch with Dina tomorrow morning,
Okay, great.
and you can be in touch with Dina.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you and good
Thank you
night.
very much.
Good night,
Thank you, Ann,
everybody.
Good night,
Larry.
everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Excellent, just excellent.
Thank you.
Rivka, you did great.
Thank you. Thanks for being my technology photo person.